Well, indeed, because, I mean, and it wasn't just the Crawford Committee, because Fraser had put him on the Reserve Bank.
Oh, he was on the Reserve Bank board also.
In 1974.
Yes.
Then he put him onto the Jackson Committee on
That's
Manufacturing Industry, and the Crawford was a follow-up on
Yes.
structural adjustment.
Yes.
Which means that for 8 years, part-time, Bob had been having a concentrated set of studies and seminars
Yes.
on the nature and direction of the Australian economy. No Australian Prime Minister has ever had that sort of preparation.
That's right.
I'm sure.
That's right. So he
And you
had,
have to doubt that anyone ever would.
so he had a very good knowledge of what was wrong, and there was a great deal wrong, as many of us might remember. Back in late 82, early 83, we had more than 10% unemployment, more than 10% inflation, the worst drought in living memory in the eastern states, including, I think, in South Australia.
It wasn't good.
And the country was terribly divided, it was uncertain, etc. So he knew that the economy had to be got back on the right track, and he seriously wanted to bring harmony to the country again. So his actual election motto was Bob Hawke, bringing the country together to try and stop this slide, which, as I say in the book, Lee Kuan Yew, the Prime Minister of Singapore, had said Australia's going to be the poor white trash of Asia if it goes on the way it's going. Mm.
Yes, and I think Ross Garnaut makes a comment about the very protected economy at the time being characterised by rent-seeking behaviour. So that's one thing that didn't quite get changed, because we've been seeing a little bit of rent-seeking behaviour in response to the climate change issue. But all of this, when you look at it that way, it could have made him an antidote to the perceived division that arose out of the Fraser era and persisted throughout it, despite, I think, some attempts by Fraser to do a bit of healing, but it did persist. But it pointed towards him just being the economic reformist Prime Minister. And indeed, they did a lot of economic reforms, and we might come to those later. But that doesn't begin to account for the nature of his Prime Ministership, or for how large he looms in the consciousness of the general public of Australia still today. Where's that come from?
Well, if I go to the last part first, I think he really is an odd human being, and
you are being recorded.
Yes. But somehow he taps into the folk spirit of Australia, is the only way I can put it. He has an intense and genuine love for the country. He really, really loves the country. And I think people somehow pick that up on even a non-conscious level. So that's how the appeal is there, and of course that was very useful in being able to bring in reforms, because reforms are always painful for somebody. So that affection that the electorate had for him was a very useful tool for him to use. And the first part of the question's now gone out of my little pointed head.
I think it was a rather longish prelude.
No, it was what other things he did as Prime Minister. And he not only wanted to see the Australian economy reformed, but he really wanted to see, and society, but uplifted, but he wanted to see Australia's position in the world increased and strengthened, and he did a great deal in that area. And his main thing really was developing the relationship with China, which...
let's get on to China.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, that had begun in some ways.
With Gough Whitlam.
Yes,
Gough Whitlam was the first person who went to China. He was very, very criticised for that. He was when he was leader of the opposition in '71. But then...
as far as Bob was concerned?
Oh,
He began making his contacts with the Chinese leadership.
Yes. Bob would refuse to go to China until Mao and the Gang of Four were dead.
Yeah.
He really felt they were quite evil. And he's always greatly disliked Chairman Mao, which I probably shouldn't say. So he first went in 78.
Indeed.
Which was the moment when Deng Xiaoping, the the Premier of China, was opening China to the world, just beginning to open China to the world. And so he got to know them from that moment on, and then developed a very, very close, strong relationship.
And I now can't remember whether that first meeting is in this book or in the other book. But one thing that did strike me, because I think it became a theme on several fronts throughout this account that you've given, that he and the then emerging leadership of the People's Republic agreed on an important matter of sequence, that economic reform comes first and political reform follows.
Yes.
And that theme is repeated quite often.
Yes.
In his prime ministership.
Yes, that's right. He believed that was important in Australia. He believed it was important in China. He had a long meeting with Gorbachev, and thought what
same thing occurs there.
He thought the Soviet Union was doing it backwards. They were bringing in political reform and economic reform they thought would follow, but of course it didn't work like that. It just became anarchic. And he also believes very strongly that what's being done in the Middle East vis-a-vis Israel and Palestine is putting the cart before the horse, trying to get a political solution before having an economy in Palestine. You've got 50 to 60% unemployment in Palestine, and why not become a suicide bomber if you've got no future whatsoever? So that is a very consistent belief of his.
And
start with the material, then go on to the less material.
Bertolt Brecht, bread before circuses.
Bread before circuses.
But I think history's on the side too. There are historians in the room. I speak in trepidation, but it does seem that shifts in economic power have tended to force shifts in political arrangements.
Yes.
And this is something that he's emphasised very much in all sorts of contexts.
And if I may just add to that,
Sure.
Michael, for example, Bob's never been concerned about a serious clash between Taiwan and China, because, as he's said repeatedly, the Taiwan businessmen just will not allow the Taiwan politicians to attack the mainland, although every now and again there's an upsurge of fist shaking and shouting and so forth, that it simply won't happen because the economic interest between the two of them are too strong.
Which is why APEC was founded not as countries.
That's right, but as economies.
Yes.